All right, welcome back to the Nexus Podcast. We're here at Black Hat in beautiful Las Vegas. Nice and cool here. It's Salvatore Gariuolo, senior threat researcher at Trend Micro, joins me today. We're going to talk about safe EV charging, and in particular the ISO 15118 standard that is meant to create a trusted environment for electric vehicle charging. Salvatore is doing a talk here at Black Hat this week that examines how thorough the standard is around cybersecurity. So welcome, nice to meet you.
Thanks, Michael, and thanks for having me here over the podcast. It's a pleasure, first of all.
Absolutely.
And we're here at Black Hat discussing about the standard. So we are analyzing the cybersecurity of the ISO 15118 standard. And this is particularly important today because this is a global communication standard that is quickly reshaping the EV charging ecosystem.
Mm-hmm.
And the standard directly addresses the cybersecurity of the ecosystem. And what we're going to discuss here at Black Hat is particularly relevant for the cybersecurity space. Because, when we hear about a standard, we feel a natural sense of security.
Sure.
A sense of relief, because that standard means structure. And standard means that someone thought things through. And that this is the case. But here at Black Hat, we are going to demonstrate that this can also be a false sense of security, because the standard might also change the playing field in ways that we haven't fully mapped out yet.
Mm-hmm. So there are a couple of things here at play. It's not just the security of the whole infrastructure, but kind of the pressure that these charging stations are going to put on the grid, correct? Is that your understanding as the genesis of kind of the standard and how it was developed, why it was put in place?
Yeah, I believe so. There are multiple reasons behind the introduction of the standard. One of them is obviously security. But as you mentioned, in my opinion, the main reason behind the introduction of the standard is to make the grid more efficient. Because right now, when we have a large number of electric vehicles charging in the same spot at the same time, the grid is not managing to handle the load. So we are in a very weird situation where the adoption of electric vehicle might actually jeopardize the infrastructure that makes the adoption possible. So we need measures to help the grid cope with the load coming from electric vehicles. And the standard, the ISO standard, does exactly that, because it introduces features like smart charging and vehicle-to-grid communication.
So what are some of the cybersecurity threats that could be affecting this whole infrastructure?
Michael, this is a very interesting question. And this is probably the foundation of the talk today at Black Hat. Because when we think about a standard, we try to think about what are the risks that the standard mitigates. So the standard is pretty useful because it mitigates risks like unauthorized charging sessions that are particularly easy to pull off today. But at the same time, we also have to focus on the risks that the standard leaves behind. And this is a particularly important focus for cybersecurity because, for example, with the introduction of the standard, we might protect the communication between the EV and the charging station. But at the same time, if we leave the charging station exposed, it will still be possible for malicious users to carry out a denial of service, for example. And then we also have a new class of attacks. So risks that were not there before. So these are risks that are introduced by the innovation of the standard. So we have risks that are possible just because the standard introduces new functionalities like smart charging and vehicle-to-grid.
And are these practical attacks that could be pulled off today? Or what do they look like?
Yes, because something that we usually do at Threat Micro when we analyze threat is to understand the risk behind the threat. So we don't only evaluate the technical feasibility of an attack. That will be limiting when we analyze the security measures to be put in place. We also have to analyze what is the potential impact of the threat and also what is the likelihood of the threat. That's even more important because this gives us an idea on which of these threats is likely to be pulled off by an attacker. And some of them, unfortunately, are pretty easy to pull off. And there are many reasons behind this, and one of these is that the charging station is left unexposed. So the charging station is still one of the most vulnerable entities in the EV charging ecosystem.
And are these attacks is there a capability to pull them off remotely, or is it physical? You need physical access to the charging station?
So in most of the cases, we need like physical access to the charging station. So this might give you the impression that these type of attacks are more difficult to pull off because we need someone physically present at the charging station. But at the same time, we cannot forget that charging stations are publicly accessible and are often left without any security in place, so it's without anyone actually looking on them. This creates a security spot, it's true. And um, the charging station is the most vulnerable in the charging ecosystem. Some of the attacks that require the charging station are more difficult to pull off. And if we think, for example, about grid attacks, so we have a particular form of attacks that put at risk the national grid, for example. And these are types of attack that require a lot of skill, a lot of budget. But that this doesn't write this type of threats off. It actually just restricts the pool of attacker to a very specific malicious actor that has the budget and
Sure.
the means to act.
And are the cars at risk, or is it strictly the infrastructure behind the charging itself?
No, I wouldn't say so. Probably the most impactful attack is on the infrastructure. So that's the place where the most significant risks lie. But at the same time, is even the EVs are at risk. And for example, and this is because the charging station are separate physical system. So this means that an attack on the EV charging ecosystem doesn't only affect the digital space, it also has an effect on our real life. And for example, charging stations might be used if they are compromised to deliver unsafe power levels. And this is particularly dangerous because, first of all, it can put at risk the components in the electric vehicles, like the battery. But this can also create safety hazard for the user.
Sure.
Imagine having an electric vehicle on fire because of these attacks.
Mm-hmm. And the risk to the grid, is it an overload issue, or can you do these at scale, I guess is what I'm asking, and how would it impact the grid?
Yes, this is something that will impact probably large portions of our national grid. And this makes this type of attacks pretty dangerous. I always like to provide an example of this.
Sure.
Obviously, we have the blackout that struck Spain in April of 2025, so earlier this year. And don't get me wrong, this was not caused by a cyber attack. But it explains you why it can happen if a malicious actor actually put in place this type of grid attack. Because our electricity grid works on a fragile balance between the amount of electricity that is produced and the amount of electricity that is consumed. So if we have excess electricity on the grid, this creates a dangerous situation. And these will become more and more relevant over time because we are starting to rely more on renewable energy, like solar and wind. So this means that when there is an excess of electricity on the grid, the frequency of the grid, that is the heartbeat of the grid, moves out of safe operational limit. This is what happened in Spain. So even if we had some safeguard mechanisms in place, these were not able to act quick enough. So the entire grid, the national grid, was disconnected to avoid more dangerous situation.
Mm-hmm.
And this is something that malicious user can do by exploiting the ISO 15118 standard. So a malicious user could manipulate the charging station, could take over the charging station, and could, for example, simulate energy fluctuations at the charging station level. But obviously, this has to be done on multiple charging stations at the same time. So it's a type of attack that is very difficult to pull off. But if we have multiple synchronized charging stations pulling and pushing electricity from the grid at the same time, we might be able to artificially induce that situation of shifting the frequency of the grid out of safe operational limit. So that will force the grid to be disconnected, potentially even the national grid.
And are you talking about, for example, exploits of software or firmware vulnerabilities, or are you just talking about the installation of some kind of malicious code? What would an attack look like, I guess, is what I'm
So we said so far that the charging station is the entry point for most of the attacks.
Okay.
And this is clear today because we have recent audits demonstrating that, for example, we still have charging stations that are built with off-the-shelf components like Raspberry Pi. Some of them still leave open debug ports, open maintenance interface. Some of them have unsecure remote access. And we said at the beginning of this conversation, the charging station is publicly accessible. So this means that malicious user can simply go there and physically tamper with the hardware. And once you get control of the access to the hardware of the charging station, a malicious user could, for example, um, upload a modified version of the kernel, a modified version of the operating system, and then it will escalate privileges to gain full root access. So once that is done, it's pretty easy to pull off any attack on the charging station level.
Have there been attacks? Looking at this from the outside, this is not an attack vector I would consider off the top of my head. So.
Fortunately, we didn't see this type of threats happening yet, but we will likely see it. And this is because for a malicious user,